When Archer Huntington was creating the Hispanic Society, he was doing so at a moment when Spanish art was not, in the other great collections in New York, the primary focus.
Why do you want to study a dead culture? So that gives you an idea of what the view of Spain was at that time, and it was even worse after the Spanish-American War.
That Spanish-American War put Spain and, interestingly, Latin America, colonial culture, back on the radar screen for America. Mr. Huntington was way ahead of that movement.
What Huntington did was completely new in New York. He really brought the whole school, the Siglo de Oro, and then ultimately also the art of Latin America together in a way that demonstrated the extraordinary contribution of those schools to the history of art.
If all of Spain were to disappear today, it would still survive in the Hispanic Society. The origins of the Hispanic Society begin with a 12-year-old boy who traveled to Europe with his mother for the very first time in 1882. And that boy was Archer Milton Huntington. The visits to the Louvre and the British Museum made him absolutely fall in love with museums. He even wrote in his diary that he would love to live in a museum. He bought a book from an out-of-print rare book dealer, and it was that book that actually started his interest and passion for Hispanic culture. He traveled to Spain several times, but he actually spent 10 years studying everything he could on Spain before he traveled there for the first time. Before he was even 30 years old, he was working on a translation of the epic Poema del Nilo Cid, which he did publish in 3 separate volumes. He told his father that he did not want to manage the Newport News shipyard, and he then set about establishing plans for his museum and library. By 1900, at the age of 30, his father died, and with the death of his father, he had a lot more resources, and he could actually start planning what he really had as a vision for his life.
Archer Huntington had in mind a separate museum. The whole idea was to have the entire focus of one institution on Spanish art and its legacy across the world.
When the time came in 1904 that he felt that he was ready to establish the Hispanic Society, land was purchased at 155th Street and Broadway in Upper Manhattan. He probably chose the location because he was familiar with it, maybe through his mother, because his mother already owned a portion of the land that is today Audubon Terrace. And the other motivation to come to this part of Manhattan was most likely due to the #1 subway line opening in 1904 that ran all the way up to the Hispanic Society at that time. The interior of the Hispanic Society was based on, it's very distinctive, it's all in fired terracotta. The designs are based on the Vélez Blanco patio that's today at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He married his second wife, who was Anna Hyatt, and Anna Hyatt Huntington had, in her earlier life, had been an extremely successful woman sculptor in the United States. She began work on the monumental statue of El Cid, which dominates the terrace, and other designs were created to complement all the sculpture out there.
Through probably Sorolla, he came to the attention of Alfonso XIII, and Alfonso XIII realized the importance of the Hispanic society as a way to foster an image of Spain, a positive image of Spain abroad for its culture. And one of the fruits of this is that in 1917, during World War I, the royal collections of tapestries were exhibited at the Hispanic Society, and this is a testament to the relationship between Alfonso XIII and Huntington.
Mr. Huntington sponsored 2 separate exhibition campaigns for Sorolla in the United States. The first one was in 1909, when 168,000 people visited the Society in February in order to see Sorolla's works.
Sorolla's paintings were so full of life and so bright, it literally changed the impression in New York of Spain at that time. In fact, they even wrote in the press, this had, brought Spain back up to an estimable position. It had changed the view of it. His collecting seriously for the museum began around 1900, and he had already studied everything he possibly could through photographs. At that time, everyone has to remember that there weren't color art books like there are today. It was much more difficult to study the material, and there was a lot less published on Spanish art, so you really had to be familiar with it. He visited the Prado extensively, studied everything he could, and he personally really selected everything that he bought. From the very beginning, he had a specific plan on how he wanted to collect, and that was basically breaking all creative facets of Hispanic culture into categories, and he was going to collect everything in the decorative arts. He collected prints and photographs. He collected medals. He collected paintings. He collected sculpture. And for the library, his great interest was really on rare books and manuscripts.
The photographs that the Hispanic Society commissioned directly from its staff members, they reflect at first hand what Huntington wanted, the genuine Spain. The most famous of the photographers was Ruth Anderson. The photography collection, just like the prints, is interrelated with the other holdings, in this case with the museum department, in other cases with the library. And it shows, again, how the unity of the vision Huntington had of what he wanted documented is visible throughout the whole collection.
In 1902, he had the good fortune of being able to buy the library of the Marqués de Jerez de los Caballeros in Seville, which was the most important private library in Spain at that time, focused on early Spanish literature, which also had a few manuscripts in it. That really gave the original core of the rare books and manuscript collection. Huntington developed a relationship with a rare book dealer in Leipzig, Germany, Karl Hirsemann, who was one of the major rare book manuscript dealers in Europe. And it was that relationship that led to about 10 years of collecting almost exclusively through Hirsemann. Within that 10-year period of about 1905 to 1914, the onset of World War I, which stopped the relationship with Hirsemann, Huntington collected tens of thousands of manuscripts, in fact, several 100,000 manuscripts through Hirsemann, and thousands of rare books, which really built up what the Hispanic Society's library collection is today.
Where does the Hispanic Society rank or fit in the museum world of New York? I would say it is probably a combination of the Frick collection and the Morgan Library. In other words, collections that are rarefied, focused, and at the same time augmented by great research centers of libraries and manuscripts and so forth.
Huntington had a general policy from early on of not collecting early art directly out of Spain. His views were that the works should stay where they were, that they shouldn't be taken out, whereas a lot of other American collectors were buying directly out of Spain in the late 19th and early 20th century. But Huntington bought primarily from dealers in Paris, London, and New York.
Where else will you find 3 works and great works by Velázquez in one institution? There are very few museums in the world. Even the Louvre does not have 3 works by Velázquez. One shouldn't wonder, in fact, how it was possible in 1904 to create such a vast collection of historical collection of works from primarily Spain and Latin America. One has to remember that the entire museum history is not much more than 200 years old. So 1904 is pretty much in the middle point between the start of museums with the Louvre in 1793 and today. And so an entire century, the 20th century, was available for the acquisition of a great many works of art that had not yet entered collections or museums, because museums were still pretty much in their adolescence at that time.
Over the past 15 years, we've had a particular focus on buying colonial Latin American works to build up that collection, because when Huntington was collecting himself, there was very little on the market. He did buy certain colonial things like Talavera Poblana pottery from Mexico, but it was quite limited otherwise. Archer Huntington was a great philanthropist. In fact, he was a philanthropist to a fault, to a certain extent, because by the time he died, he had essentially given away everything. His wife, Anna Hyatt Huntington, still had sufficient resources to live comfortably to an old age, but he had basically given everything away by that point.
He helped found 3 institutions in Spain, the Casa de Cervantes, the Museo Romantico, and the Casa Museo del Greco.
He had already been involved in a major way with other institutions in New York, such as the American Museum of Natural History. He sponsored a lot of scientific expeditions. One was the expedition to Machu Picchu that led to the discovery of it. Huntington really sought anonymity. He didn't want to create a foundation that bore his name for eternity, like the Rockefellers and the Fords and others. He really was a true philanthropist that basically gave away the money because he wanted it to go to a very specific good purpose, for the public good.
The wonders of this institution is its aura, is the manner in which the works of art are presented. The Hispanic Society Museum and Library is a collection that could never be recreated today.